instructors. I'll start again. I'm Ann Mallon of the Cream Literary Alliance, and tonight I'm happy to have my mentor, my friend, and one of our very first instructors for the nonprofit, Josip Novakovich, at this event hosted by Christopher-romaguera. And I'm not going to give you the history of the little nonprofit, but I am going to tell you that if you're a writer, you might want to keep an eye on us as we shift to serve more writers beyond South Florida. And you can read more on our website, thecreamwpb.org. Tonight, you get to sit back and listen to two dynamic writers chat about Josip's new book. And it's an interesting, strange and funny and odd noir, Rubble of Rubles. You'll hear short reading. There'll be a discussion. Then we'll do a little Q&A. At the very end, Josip has agreed to hang out for a little bit socially from 8 to 8:30. So at that point, we'll invite you to unmute yourself if you want to hang out and ask some more questions. So first, it's my pleasure to introduce Christopher-romaguera. Christopher Luis Romaguera is a Cuban-American writer born in Hialeah and raised in Miami, Florida. He graduated with bachelor's degrees in both English and philosophy from Florida International University. He has an MFA from the University of New Orleans. His publications include The Daily Beast, Curbed National, Pank Magazine, New Orleans Review, Santa Fe Writers Project, Louisiana Literature, Grub Rights, and Podunk Review. Romaguera has worked as a staff writer for French Quarter Journal and Where Ya At magazine. He's been a beat reporter for NOLA Defender, writing stories about protests, the activist movement, and stories involving Latinx peoples within New Orleans. Romaguera is also a monthly columnist for Plowshares, the fiction editor at the New Southern Fugitives, and the editorial intern at Electric Literature. I have no idea when he sleeps or if he sleeps. He's also a bartender at a very cool bar in New Orleans, and he's also a board member on this nonprofit, the Cream Literary Alliance. So he's just an amazing literary citizen and an all-around good human. So thank you, Chris. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Anne. I really appreciate y'all being here. And I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you, Josip. To read the bio, Josip Novakovich is a Croatian-American writer who resides in Canada. His work has been translated into Croatian, Bulgarian, Indonesian, Russian, Japanese, Italian, and French. That is impressive, among other languages. He was a finalist for the Man Booker International Prize in 2013 and also received the American Book Award from the Before Columbus Foundation, the Whiting Writers Award, and a John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation Fellowship for Fiction, as well as a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts. His work has appeared in the Parish Review, Threepenny, Plowshares, go team, and many other journals, and has been anthologized in the Best American Poetry, the Pushcart Prize, and the O. Henry Prize Stories. He teaches English at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. Thank you for joining us, Josip.
Well, thank you for having me and for introducing me. And so I will just read a little bit and then we can chat. I guess you will ask me some questions. And anyway, I won't contextualize much here. The protagonist of the novel, David, is imprisoned because he was near a site where a Georgian wine importer was mowed down in a car, and David was in the car. His cabbie mowed down the importer. Anyway, so he's in prison, and it's a funky prison, and it's actually based on a true account of what the prison was like. Yesterday, the prisoners had a library. It wasn't all that bad, but in the library there were 200 books, and all of them were a copy of Crime and Punishment. So imagine spending 20 years with nothing else to read but Crime and Punishment. Anyway, I promise it won't be as punishing to listen to me or to read my novel, and I will jump into it. Anyway, Putin is visiting the prison to see what's going on in St. Petersburg, and here we go. Putin shook hands with me and looked up. He was only 5'5", slightly taller than Beethoven, and slightly less angry. On television, he looked taller. I was nearly a head taller than the leader of the New World Order. Yet the height didn't give me a feeling of superiority. Putin gazed into my eyes without blinking. His handshake was amazingly limp. He gave me a dead mackerel handshake. I was ready to do some bone crunching to prove that I too had energy. He half smiled with his thin lips and shielded eyes. I was about to withdraw my hand from the handshake, which had been going on a little too long. Our hands bobbed up and down, and then Putin squeezed my hand, turned around swiftly, and flipped me over his head and landed me on my feet. I had no time to think or react. Just a little judo handshake, a test to see whether you are familiar with the martial arts, he said. Very impressive, I said. Your physical guard, however, isn't. And what are you here for? False accusations. I did nothing. Nobody's here for false accusations. There's no such charge. What is the charge against you? That I killed 2 Georgian wine importers. And you didn't? No, Sir President, I haven't. I'm sorry to hear that. To hear what? You claim that you didn't eliminate 2 Georgian businessmen. Let me gaze into your soul for a second. Putin got closer, put his hand on my belly, the soft area above the belt, an inch of spillover generosity of life, and he looked up. Strangely enough, or not so strangely, due to the Chinese contraband, I had to reckon with an erection. Just in parenthesis, out of context, the guards are experimenting on prisoners to see whether the Chinese Cialis is effective, because they want to start selling it, and so all the prisoners have to reckon with too many erections. And anyway, so the slightest touch, Putin touch him on the belly, and David gets an erection. So, well, I look down, but not in the psychological sense, but rather awkward, stilted, literally stilted, as though my legs were too long and wooden. Putin awaited my response. I knew that his gaze, representing the mineral resources of the North, could not be ignored. My eyes could focus. My gaze shifted to Putin's ears, to the wall bricks, to the tip of his nose. My eyeballs oscillated. Yes, I see, he said. You did eliminate 2 businessmen. That is truly fantastic. You are tourists in our country and you are improving it. You should be our national hero. You're messing with me, I said. You shall come with me to Petrodorets for a celebration. How would you like to work for me? But can I be freed from the prison? That's done. You're coming along with me. The conversation continued at Petrodorets in Peter the Great's study near his tall bed and tall boots. It struck me as a strange turn in Russian history that after a giant founded modern Russia, such a short man should be leading it. So here's my offer, he said. If you follow it through, I will give you a square kilometer of beach property on the Lake Baikal right next to one of my dachas. Go to Tbilisi and meet up with the Georgian president. As an American wine importer, you will have easy access to him. I'm not a wine importer. You are. If you weren't until now, I tell you, you are now. You want me to negotiate for you? You obviously don't like Georgian competition, so it should be a pleasure for you to thwart them. Why don't you like Georgia? I asked. Wasn't your grandfather a personal cook to Stalin? Yes, he cooked a few meals for Stalin. How do you know that? But you know, Stalin deliberately destroyed Petersburg. He let the Germans encircle it and choke it. And you resent not Germany, but Georgia for it? When you meet with the Georgian president, drink with him, and he will get terribly drunk. And you can push him off his balcony at his country retreat, or put some plutonium in his wine. They might shoot me on the spot. They might. Well, it doesn't sound good. by the time the poison finishes him off, you will be back in Moscow or New York, but you'd be safer in Moscow. Anyway, so I'll stop here.
Thank you for reading that for us. I love that scene.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So I was to start it off, like just from the beginning, especially after having heard that scene and thinking about reading Crime and Punishment for 20 years in a row. I was really curious, like, how did you get the inspiration to write this? I'm so fascinated by like where your process started when working on this.
Well, I spent a year in St. Petersburg. I was on a research fellowship, but I found out I'm incapable of doing research, you know, going to libraries and so on. And so I was just hanging out in the city, and instead of writing what I promised I would be writing, a novel about the First World War and the Serbian and Croatian participants there. Tito, for example, was an Austrian soldier who was captured and in Russian and then Soviet prisons. He learned the craft of communism and dictatorship from Lenin and the gang. Went to Yugoslavia and made a mess over there. But anyway, so that was my intention to write about First World War. But as a woeful researcher, I was hanging out, and then in the end, the city struck me as so strange that I thought I would just write about it. And actually, a friend of mine gave me an assignment to write a noir set in St. Petersburg. So I started with the story. I had seen once in the streets a dead man, young man, in the morning. So, and then in the afternoon after lunch, he was still there. Then in the evening, he was still there, and nobody was picking him up. And I thought that was amazing. So that was the inspiration to explain to myself how something like that was possible. It was obviously noir enough, and it drove me into this.
Yeah, it's really interesting because like I could very much see the noir elements because we're following, you know, the main character throughout this, and like the story keeps unveiling. You know, the humor, the mood isn't always noir, but I really enjoyed like how it did kind of like you took us through this world that unfurled very noir. Like I thought that was really well done. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the funny thing is the noir anthology that a friend of mine said that he would place it in, it never got to be published. It was a whole series of these noir, you know, in the, I think even New Orleans and in London and New York, all over the world. And later on, there was a noir anthology set in St. Petersburg. I had another assignment to write a noir story set in Zagreb, Croatia. That one did get published, and there, you know, if I think of anything noir in Croatia, the first thing that comes up is soccer, the hooligans and all that. So I wrote a soccer story about. Well, I'm not going to get into that one, but so let's go on with this one.
Yeah, no, I think that's like this. It was interesting that you mentioned the real life experience of the body, because that was such a striking scene, and it was such an interesting way of like looking at the world. Like I think of how like the comment that, you know, if nobody touches the body, it's mafia. Like that was a really good way of like utilizing that. Can you speak a little bit about like what you were trying to accomplish with the body a bit, and so early in the book?
Oh yeah, well, actually that was my opening scene before, and then I restructured it because there is another body, and that I got the inspiration for that with when I was actually going as a tourist to Kristi prison to check it out, because I was thinking I might actually want to set a novel there, but or I needed it for the First World War novel, and anyway, the way a cabbie drove really crazily, and he was waved down by the police. and very quickly he was free, and we were driving on, and I said, "What happened? Did you have to bribe them?" No, he said, "I'm a police chief, and they're just bums, you know. So why?" And I just rebuked them. And I thought, "Wow, this is crazy." And my cab driver is actually a policeman, and running red lights, driving 100 kilometers an hour, and so on. And so from this crazy cab ride, I got the idea of him actually killing a pedestrian, and then well, that didn't happen, and so on. But you know, in fiction, you basically just have to exaggerate.
Yes.
If you exaggerate enough, it is fiction.
Yes, I feel that. I feel that. I like that.
So
it was interesting.
I have another. So the pedestrian is hit there, and he's well, is dead, and he ends up in the dumpster near the apartment complex where David is staying, and David then well, that's brought up against him that it cannot be a coincidence, because he was seen first with one corpse and then the other, and he goes to prison.
Yeah, going back to an earlier comment you had, it surprised me that you said that you're not good at research, or that you're incapable of research, because I feel like there is so much information in this book. Yeah, like I felt like I was reading a book.
I did have to do research. I read some biographies of Lenin, Stalin, Putin, and so on. So I could even be talking about Lenin's cat, things like that. I don't absorb the important details, but I absorb some details. Well, and for example, this about after I wrote the scene with the pedestrian pushed under the car, then I read that was one form of execution that Stalin practiced. So it was very real. And you know, I wrote this novel before people were being pushed off the balcony, and so I have this scene, and now it's obviously one of the favorite ways of execution for Putin. People just all of them happen to fall off the 16th floor from one building or another. But by the way, in parentheses, I think we should celebrate today. It's Ides of March, which is assassination of one dictator, Julius Caesar, who actually looks remarkably like Putin. You know, they're very similar. So I mean, it kind of gives me ideas, but unfortunately, you know, they're just ideas. So in my novel, actually, it's Putin wants David to go to Georgia and assassinate Saakashvili, the president. But I went to a Russian party, and they said, why don't you have a different plot where someone assassinates Putin? We would enjoy that far more.
I'm not touching that. No, it was I was very impressed, because I feel like I was reading, and as someone who enjoys history, especially, you know, it's interesting that you said that about World War I. As someone who enjoys history with, you know, learning about history in World War I and World War II, I feel like I don't know the region of Russia as much as I would want to. And I feel like you in this book taught me a lot, like, you know, between Peter the Great and Rasputin, like there were so many things that I thought were really interesting, and how you wrote about it historically, but also like the mythos of it. And I was curious how you went about doing that, because I never felt like I was bogged down, but I felt like I constantly was learning. How did you go about like weaving all that information in the narrative?
Well, the thing is, initially, the novel was twice as long, and a lot of it was historical digressions, and some editors and an agent I had before were impatient with me and said, why don't you eliminate a lot of the history and the anecdotes and get on with the plot, you know, what happens with David. So, for example, I had David in prison, you know, he has enough time. So I had a whole story about Rasputin, and I took it out. And I had another story about Slobodan Milosevic, and I took that one out. It didn't really belong there, but I had too many digressions because actually, you know, I do like history and I like anecdotes from history. And one of my favorite books is the histories by Herodotus,
Mm.
where, you know, father of history and father of lies, because there's such fantastic anecdotes there. And so, anyway, I did read stuff, put it in, and took it out, and so on, and then I also put some jokes in, you know.
No, I was. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you know, because they're all over. Some that I remember people telling me, and others that actually went on the internet and found.
Yeah, I was really curious because when I think of the plot of your novel, like there's times where it's very serious, but you've somehow mined it for so much humor. And I was curious how you were able to make a story that lives in like kind of like an area that is when we're reading about it online or whatever, or reading about the newspaper is serious. But you were able to make so much of it so funny. Can you like how were you able to get humor like that in there?
Well, you know, if you come from a crazy and absurd history, like most of us from Eastern Central Europe do, then uh, even if you just describe real events, eventually they're so ridiculous that you have to laugh and you notice absurdities. So many critics say that Kafka, you know, is credited more perhaps than he should have for inventing an absurdist world of bureaucracy, because, you know, the Bohemia had its own bureaucracy, which was supervised and dominated by the Austrian bureaucracy, and so there were many layers of bureaucracy. And then when you read old novels, Russian novels, you see that there 16 ranks of clerks, you know. So I mean, an incredible hierarchy. It's kind of also funny that the most hierarchical society you can imagine ended up with the idea of equality and communism, which obviously never worked, and you can kind of see why not, because this society was always based on inequality.
Yeah.
Tsar and then nobles and so on. I don't know whether I still have that anecdote in or whether it was taken out, because I was taking so many anecdotes out. So I'll take this one. I'll tell this one very briefly. So the Russian dinners in the noble houses arranged so that the highest nobility would eat first, then the lower rank nobility later, and the lesser ones in the end. So there was a dinner at Prince Potomkin's, and next to him sat Duke, and then the counts, and so on. And then so the dinner went on for 3 or 4 hours, and at the end, the prince asked a lower ranked nobleman at the end of the table, how did you like the dinner? And he said, Your Excellency, I loved it. I saw everything. The poor
That's great.
poor guy didn't even get to eat, because these guys would
Yeah.
say first, seconds, and thirds. And anyway, so in a society like that, with that mentality, how can you actually hope to create equality?
Yeah. No, and that was a great example of like how you use humor to like teach the reader. Because I feel like every joke was funny, but it also like taught me a little bit about Russia and about the world that was being traversed. And you did that really, really well. Like I was, yeah, that was really well done.
You know, like when there was war in the former Yugoslavia, people always joking because there were absurd things going on. Well, I'm not gonna now give you jokes from there, but there was partly one way for them to cope with it. Also, even if it was sometimes exciting and threatening. It's mostly boring, you know. When everything stops, there's an economy, and so what are you gonna do? You start joking.
That, yeah, that's the like the anecdote, right? Like you laugh because you want to cry, you know, like, yeah, you just change it.
Right. And you know, it's universal, not just Eastern Europe. I used to teach at Nebraska Indian Community College, and we had lots of Native American writers visit. And one theme that was coming up all the time was humor, and it was called survival humor. You know, it does help you survive.
Yeah, no, 100%. I feel that that's my family with like their exile from Cuba. It was kind of similar. Like there's lots of jokes about it. You know, that's how you cope.
Oh yeah, that's just I read Virgil Suarez. Do you know Virgil Suarez?
Yes, amazing.
Yeah, and he's a friend of mine. I blurbed his new book, so I was very happy that he asked me to do that. But you know, he has this sense of humor too, because in a way, Cuba is like because of communism and all that, it's like a bit of Eastern Europe stuck in the Western Hemisphere.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, it's that's a very good way of putting it. um, what's it called? Speaking of that, a minute ago or a little bit ago, you said how you had been to like a museum, I believe, of like or like a prison for research. Did you like how much of your research was like going to museums or going to these places? How much of it was like you know, you using like looking up resources and reading? Like how were you able to research all this because the world was so well built?
Well, a combination of a deliberate research and observation and accidental stuff. So you know, because well, if you just walk around enough in St. Petersburg, you're bound to see something strange, and
Yeah.
you will probably have strange encounters, and so it's and I stay there long enough to have both kinds of research, the bookish, the museum and prison visits and such, and some interviews, and then the rest just the experiences. For example, going to the Lutheran cemetery, which was neglected for a long time because after the Second World War, nobody wanted to admit to being German. And the Germans were afraid to visit the cemetery to put flowers on their relatives' graves. I saw completely neglected. So I went there and I walked, and some of the graves were sort of opened up by the powerful roots of the trees. And then I saw a bunch of yellow dogs going to a grave and out of it, and I said, wow. So obviously I put that in the novel because it's so striking.
It's amazing how when you walk around a city like that, like things like that will just present itself for you that are perfect for whatever you're writing and working on. To keep it a little bit about like process, I believe in your acknowledgements you said that you wrote a good chunk of this like in residencies. Can you kind of explain how like residencies helped you out, or what part of like any grants or residencies or foundations played in the writing of the novel?
Oh yeah, well, since when my kids were around, and I was very bad at balancing being a father, a professor, a writer, and an alcoholic. You know, it's a hard task. Now, I'm not really an alcoholic, but since I'm denying it, that's very suspect. By the way, I'm now 15 days on the wagon, not a drop. But so anyway, I would have had more time for sure if I hadn't liked wine and some other things. So sometimes a whole semester would go by and I will have written very little. And then it was helpful to have summers off, and I would go sometimes to Yado for a month or to some other writers' retreats. A friend of mine had an artist colony on an island in Maine, Northern Ireland, so I would sometimes go there. And then there was in Florida there is uh, Hermitage, or they say Hermitage, south of Sarasota in Englewood, near Englewood. So I was invited there, and I was actually a member of the board inviting people and other writers there. Anyway, I got to stay there a lot. So if there was an empty spot when I needed to go and escape, I would go there and write. So that really helped to have that. Though I think I wrote a lot of it also just in cafes in well, in State College, Pennsylvania, and then here in Montreal. Because it took a while to get the novel published, and so I was writing it and rewriting it, and then also, well, first I wrote it in third person, and then my editor sent it to some publishers, and they complained that they could not get a sense of who David was. They were a little remote, and there was some kind of hidden narrator, almost omniscient, making fun of David, and that alienated them from David and from the narrative. And so to resolve that, I thought I would recast it in the first person. So I rewrote it in the first person point of view.
All right, yeah, and how was that? Because I know that's like such a huge undertaking. Like, how were you able to like flesh out David more and then start changing it to first person?
Well, actually, you know, first person is very attractive to me for anybody who's a little bit screwed up, an unreliable narrator, and nervous, self-conscious.
Yeah.
A good paradigm for that is Notes from the Underground by Dostoevsky, and that's in the first person. So you have the liberty to rave, and that helped me a bit with the voice here. But on the other hand, I cut a lot of it out and left mostly the dialogue. So in some places it's almost like a play, and you know, my writing style used to be very different. When I got to the States, I was afraid of dialogue because I was not sure of the dialects or anything like that. In Croatian, I could do dialects and dialogue, and I was good at it. But in English, I was afraid of it. And also, at the time, I had the ideology that writing should be like painting, that you should have amazing descriptions, fancy poetic word choices, beautiful sentences, and for a while I didn't really want much dialogue. And for example, I read 100 Years of Solitude. That's one of the novels that really captivated me and made me decide to write for real. There's hardly any dialogue. It's
Yeah.
I looked at it, maybe 1% of it is dialogue. The rest is just narration, description, and so on. So that was my ideal, and many stories, my early stories especially, there's very little dialogue. And in April Fool's Day, my novel about the collapse of Yugoslavia, there are scenes with dialogue, but a lot of it is narrative. And here, I look at the novel, and sometimes it looks embarrassingly play-like, you know, very little narrative, a lot of dialogue.
Yeah, but I felt like it read to me like a satirical script in that way, though. So like I thought that the rhythm and the play, but like play like the having fun aspect of it like was aided by the dialogue. Like You know, I felt like I was reading like a Coen Brothers script or something. Like the dialogue snapped, so it felt like it was doing good work.
Well, thanks.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you. You're right. No, yeah, but no, I thought it worked really well. Um, I gotta ask before like we go into Q&As, I'm gonna have to ask you, how did you conjure up the Putin scene? Because it's just so good and amazing and funny. And I don't think I've ever read Putin that way. So I gotta ask you.
Well, actually, I didn't plan it, but uh, I don't know how I came up with the idea of Putin visiting the prison, but so it was pretty spontaneous. Well, the setting, the bricks and the floors and the prisoners with tattoos and so on. I mean I saw directly, but you can see it in documentaries. You don't have to be there. So I had a good sense of location where I was, and then uh, yeah, I have actually no idea why I decided to bring in Putin. But once he was there, then the scene wrote itself. Like how do you talk to a dictator, and then
Yeah.
what does the dictator want from you? And would the dictator actually be sad that someone killed Georgians? No, actually, so the part of the inspiration for this whole thing with Georgia and Putin was this: that during my stay in St. Petersburg, I think it was in March, suddenly Putin decided that no Georgian wine was to be sold in stores, and then no Georgian mineral water. So nothing Georgian. He had this boycott because Saakashvili was flirting with the idea of NATO, and so he was trying to what the Americans do, sanctions. So this was form of sanctions and boycott against Georgia, and but pretty soon you couldn't get any wine from anywhere, Moldavia, anywhere. It was all so it was almost like a Suhoi Zakon, the dry law. Like you couldn't. People were going crazy. They couldn't get drunk, running all around the city, and there were several regimes failed when alcohol was prohibited. So he couldn't keep it on too long. But anyway, the main thing is his animosity toward Georgia and banishing the trade, banning the trade with Georgia, and especially the wine. So that gave me the idea that these guys who were killed would be wine importers, and that it was Putin's war against Georgia. And so since it was Putin's war, it was somehow natural that Putin should show up. And so then the thing of which David is accused that he's murdering Georgian wine importers is actually not something he should be in prison for, but he should be employed to keep doing it.
That was such a good twist. Like the idea that Putin was like excited about that death. Like that was just so funny. But also it rang very true, which I think is what made it so funny.
Well, now it's funny how in this current war with Ukraine, prisoners are employed as soldiers. So probably anybody who was in that prison would have a chance to be free. What kind of freedom is that in Bakhmut?
I mean, when I was reading this, I was thinking about like the timing, because while I know that Putin is not new into the scene and like there has always been these microaggressions, reading this, on the eve of the 1-year anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, it just felt so extra relevant, at least to me, someone who's living on the other side of the ocean. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, you know, I wrote it, of course, before the war in Ukraine, but it felt so similar. You know, the Putin's aggression toward a former republic, and it struck me, you know, that well, in the American tradition, you have, for example, Catch-22, which I adore. It's a comic novel about war. It's actually set in the First World War, but everybody read it as a novel set in Vietnam, an anti-Vietnam War novel. So you kind of write about the previous war to criticize the new war, and it can work. Speaking of war novels with comic intent, you know, the sort of grandfather of them is Yaroslav Hašek's The Soldier Švejk, and it's a huge novel set in First World War, and Yaroslav Hašek was a soldier in the war, and instead of, you know, being, of course, he must have been traumatized and everything. Instead of digging his trauma and being very sad and so on, he's actually just joking throughout. It's amazing how much humor in that novel there is, and it influenced, it definitely influenced Kurt Vonnegut, who wrote Slaughterhouse-Five, which is a hilarious novel, even though it's about firebombing of Dresden and the killing of 120,000 people. Not a very funny subject, really, but he manages to make a huge, well, not a huge, a very short novel about it, Slaughterhouse-Five. You know, initially it was 5,000 pages long, and it ended up being a 200-page novel. And Vonnegut said that he couldn't come to grips with what shape the narrative should be, so he was playing with it in many ways, and saw that he was straying in the directions where he didn't want to be, so he had to cut a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of my favorite. That was probably my introduction to satire in the written form, and that's still one of my favorite novels in general, much less, you know, about, even more so about war or satire. So it's just because it's so good, but it's not like dishonoring. Like, it's making fun of, but it's not dishonoring the tragedy it's writing about, which I think is a tough balance, and I think you do well as well in Rubble.
But it does help to, you know, to have read the comic novels about wars.
For sure.
So, and I mean, obviously, one can write very sad ones, and of course, Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front, which now became a major movie. I haven't seen the movie, but no, it's not a funny novel at all. I mean, how can a German write a funny novel? No, I'm kidding. Of course, a German can write a funny novel. You know,
No.
Simplicius Simplicissimus is a comic novel also, and written by a German. So Germans can be funny.
I think on that note, I do want to open it up. I put it in the chat just for those who didn't read the chat or didn't see it. Like, if anyone has questions, or please put them in and we can ask them. I do have the questions that have already been written in the chat, like written down. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna ask you some of those, Josip, if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, I saw some in the chat, and I couldn't really read the chat and talk at the same time. So, but now I'm open to questions first.
See, that's, I wrote them down for you so we can make it easier. So the first one was a question: how does a writer write about events he has not experienced personally? For example, like being in prison.
Well, how do you know I haven't been in prison? I'm kidding. I haven't been in prison as a prisoner. Well, it's we have read so much about it, scenes from prisons and seen the movies. So it's easy to imagine. I mean, it would be harder to imagine if we hadn't read about it and hadn't been in prison. But I think. And then how does one write about something one hasn't experienced? Well, for me, it seems to be relatively simple, just to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, or rather point of view, somebody else's head, and what would you see and what would you feel? And one thing that would be constant is you would still have free associations and some kind of stream of consciousness. So you can write about somebody doing stuff completely alien to you, and just get into the person's head, and you can do it. I remember listening to a famous poet. She said, nothing that humans do is alien to me. Namely, she could imagine doing anything, I mean, like, of course, we don't want to imagine that, but you can imagine being like Jeffrey Dahmer's and eating another human being. Yeah. You could imagine it, and if you withhold the judgment, you could start, having a stream of consciousness, free associating, seeing things in the room, and bring in some cats, rats, whatever, and you're there. You can construct a scene.
Yeah, always bring in the cats for sure. Another question I got was, do you think there is a distinctive Russian soul that appears in Russian literature? Yeah.
Okay, actually, I wrote about that. A Russian soul is the plagiarism of the German soul. The German in German Romanticism, Schlegel and a few other people developed the concept of die deutsche Seele, the German soul, and it was a big deal there. And then Gogol, Nikolai Gogol, who wrote Dead Souls, and he's a comic novelist, he picked up the concept, and that's how Russkaya Dusha, the Russian soul, came into being. But it's basically a plagiarism. I mean, I'm kind of kidding, but there is something, some kind of deep felt, forlorn stuff that you could say is the Russian ethos and sensibility, and sure, it could be the Russian soul, but I don't believe in the national souls.
Mm-hmm.
See, that concept of the Russian soul is very dangerous. That the Ukrainians are suffering from it now, because for Putin, the Russian soul it's the Slavic soul, and so all the Slavs are just Russians, and they should be in Mother Russia, Rodina, and so it's a dangerous concept. I mean, I don't think that Putin would acknowledge that there is such a thing as a Ukrainian soul. For him, Ukrainians don't exist. They're just Russians who have been misled to believe that there's something else. Regionally, they are regional, but they're Russians. That's his take on it.
No, that's very, I love what you just said, and I think that's very true. And I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. I got another question. What was the total time period over which you wrote your novel?
Oh, it's very embarrassing to admit. It's like 12 years because I came to it and back from it, and I was writing another novel, the one about the First World War, and then I had story collections that I was publishing, lots of stories all over the place, essays. Then I was well, that it was after I started, I immigrated to Canada, so that was very distracting. But you know, I wasn't. I was working on it on and off, and so there were many versions, many things that didn't survive in the novel, the asides and the history. You know, I used to admire well some novels that are very digressive with a lot of history and a lot of well, anyway, for example, Thomas Bernhard and so on. He allows himself to think about anything and to go anywhere in his thoughts. But I did want to streamline it and make it plotted. And so the thing is, once I talked to an agent and she wanted to represent the novel, but she wanted me to make it clearly a genre book. She wanted it to be a spy thriller, you know? And so she wanted me to get rid of more anecdotes and to have more plot twists and maybe more corpses, though I'm pretty satisfied with the quota I achieved here.
You had a good corpse count.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm sure it still would have been good, but I think you had the right, like, this book needs to live how it lives. So yeah, I'm glad you felt through on it as you did.
Yeah, I wrote it very inefficiently, I must admit. Yeah. The thing is, I probably would have done better. Once I visited my doctor in Pennsylvania, and I said, "Doctor, you know, my thoughts are flying all over the place. I don't concentrate well enough, and I need to finish a novel. Can you give me some good Ritalin or something like that? Something better than that?" And he said, "No." I said, "Why not?" He says, "I can't just prescribe you a drug like that." I said, "Well, you gave me Lipitor just like that, and we know it's dangerous, you know. So why can't you give me something for my brain? You know, you gave me something for my heart." So why it's not that simple? You should undergo tests, and then we could see. But but how did you write and publish 10 books? So I don't believe you. I don't believe that you cannot concentrate. And I didn't want to tell him that clearly he didn't read the New York Times science section. Because there I read articles about how many people who do accomplish stuff and write novels and so on are ADHD, attention deficit disorder afflicts them. And so, yeah, in other words, if that Southern Baptist jerk, he was very religious, and he believed that this was some kind of transgression, moral transgression, to give mental drugs to someone. If that zealot had been a little more permissive, I probably would have finished the novel very quickly and written 5 more in the meantime.
Well, I'm glad of what you're doing so far. I'm sorry you didn't get the prescriptions you needed. And yeah, I'm sorry for the jerks out there.
And yeah, I know he was an evangelical Christian, and it's not fair to put down any religious groups except for evangelical Christians. I'm kidding.
This is recorded. You're gonna get me in trouble.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I think I see one more question in the Q&A, and it was, were you able to speak Russian to people in St. Petersburg? I don't know.
Yes, I could carry on conversations in Russian at the time. At one point, I was basically fluent, and if people spoke clearly to me, I would understand. But it was really funny that I could. One evening, I understood everything that the women said, and nothing that the men said. And I thought, why is that? Am I just a dog, or what is going on here? But it turned out, that women pronounced more clearly, and they use less slang. And my friends used exclusively slang, and they were drunk and they slurred everything, which would be okay for French, but in Russian you really get lost. So I couldn't understand them, and it's funny. Just 3 days ago, I went to a Russian party. There were lots of Russians, and once again, I understood everything the women said and hardly anything that the guy said. So wow. So it's well, anyway. But basically, I could carry conversations, and with the guys too. I tell them, "Can you slow down?" They would, and then they make sense. But many of my friends, unfortunately, spoke better English than I spoke Russian, so we would speak in English.
That's I feel that's happened to me before. In Portuguese, where it's like, yeah, I'm surprised at who I do or don't understand, but they usually speak better English than me. I think that's all of the Q&A we have, and I think we're just in time for Anne to give us some closing remarks, but I really want to thank you, Josip, for the conversation and for writing this book. It was really a pleasure to be able to read it, and thank you so much for sharing your time.
Thanks, Chris, and I hope we'll be in touch, and then we'll somewhere on the map.
Yeah, whether in New Orleans or Florida or somewhere or Canada, I'm happy to share a drink. Maybe not vodka, that's not me, but I'll buy a rum, and you could have a vodka or wine or a Georgian wine if you want. I'll have with you.
Oh yeah, that would be great. Some Saprova. Yeah, let's keep in touch, and if you stray up north, do let me know.
I love that. I love it, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Cheers, man.
Salud.
Thanks so much, Chris. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Josip. I knew this would be a lot of fun to hear the discussions and the questions and the opportunities that our writers always need to get more ideas to write. So right now, I'd like to give a little explanation of the critique opportunities. This group here is the first to hear of. Well, we've been teasing about it. We've been giving a little bit of information, but tonight we're actually going to give you the full explanation for how 3 lucky writers who are willing to book a critique session with Josip. He's been very kind to agree to this. It's pretty cool. And first, as a writer who has personally benefited, I have to say that these critique slots are really valuable. Several of my short stories were accepted for publication after receiving feedback from Josip probably more than 10 years ago now, which is, it's kind of surprising, but that's when I got started. So I can attribute much of my success to Josip for giving me some instruction, but also from his book, Fiction Writers Workshop. If you don't have that one, if you've never heard of Fiction Writers Workshop, it's used in many different MFA programs, and I got myself a copy years ago, and it's amazing. You'll really benefit. Your work will get stronger. And also just working with him one-on-one and reading his short story collections. I mean, yeah, he's written this amazing novel, but also I don't know if everybody knows that Kirkus Reviews called him the best short stories writer of the decade. So just, take a note. So immediately after this event at 8:30, when we're finished with the little casual chatting opportunity, Josip has agreed to stay on from 8 to 8:30 to chat with people. And we'll have to have some type of a system because there are over 20 people here. So but immediately after this event on our website, on the event page, you will be able to sign up for 3 people could sign up for slots. And what you'll be doing is you'll pay a fee on our website, and then we will connect you by email with Josip. You'll be able to send a short story of up to 7 pages, double space. Josip will read your work, send you his impressions and
Well,
comments.
I think it'll be 10 pages. It's okay. It doesn't have to be.
Okay, nice. There you go. It can be up to 10 pages. We originally talked about 7, but cool. You can have up to 10 pages. He'll read your work. He'll send you his impressions and comments, and you'll get a 20-minute Zoom meeting with him to talk about it. So we'll connect you by email once you've actually made that sign up. So that's $199. And if anybody knows anything about editorial fees with award-winning writers on this level, you'll recognize this as a deal. So as a busy writer and professor, it was very kind of him to agree to do this, and we thank him for that. This will benefit both Josip and the nonprofit. So we're very, very pleased to have this opportunity for our tiny nonprofit, but also very pleased to offer it to you writers. If it is not taken up relatively soon, tonight, tomorrow morning, by tomorrow afternoon, I will be posting this and sending out an email to our larger list. We do have hundreds of people on our email list. So if you are interested and you've attended tonight, you get the first crack. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I interrupt a little bit?
Sure.
Someone praised me for being candid. Probably they didn't want me to be this candid, but I need to take a leak. So I will
Go
stop
do
the
that while
video
we're
and mute myself, and I'll be back
Sure, come
in
back.
1 minute.
Sure. We're doing
Okay,
we're doing this stuff.
Because I
So
drink too much coffee.
this is a good time to do that. And then we'll explain to
Yeah, I'll be
everybody
right
how
back.
they can. Okay, sure.
Just a moment here.
So
Okay.
this is how we'll do it. You'll be able to take a look at the website at 8:30 after this is all finished. I know Chris has to head out and leave, and that's totally cool, Chris. If you need to go, that's fine. When Josip comes back, we will invite you to turn your video back on if you'd like to stay. The half hour will be casual. It will be a discussion with friends, with people who are fans, people who maybe have not met Josip personally, but would like to ask him questions and chat a little bit. We want you to stay, we'll keep you guys muted until Josip, I don't know if there's, I think there is a raise hand function on Zoom, or you can just kind of wave, or if someone else is chatting with Josip, you know, you can just wait a little bit, and then perhaps there's a moment you can unmute and jump in. He's a teacher and has worked on Zoom at great length, and I already kind of ran this by him. He was willing to stay on and just chat with us casually, which is rare for a writer to do that, which is really kind of fun. So if you're interested in doing that, just stick around for a little bit. When he comes back, you're welcome to turn your video back on. Some of you have your videos on already. Josip, I was explaining to them that if they wanted to ask
I heard it. Yeah, it's okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Great. And so that's what we'll do. I see some people turning their videos back on. And Josip, do you want them to raise their hand or just kind of jump in, just start talking?
Well, let's see how it works. Maybe they can just start talking, and I'll talk as well, and people. Yeah. Well, let's see how
Okay.
it goes.
I'm going to switch to gallery view, because then I'll be able to see everyone's face instead of just the speaker view. And we'll be able to chat a little bit like that. So if anybody wants to ask Josip a direct question or say hi, feel free. I have my own questions if nobody says anything.
Yeah, direct question, but not too direct. I'm kidding.
Right, not too direct. Oh, I have to, sorry, I apologize. I have to give you permission to unmute yourself. Just give me 1 moment and I will do that. I have to do something here. I can do that right here. Allow participants, you now can unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay. Can I ask a question then?
Yeah. There's an echo though. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sure. I've heard that a very good way to learn how to write fiction would be to read Dostoevsky's The Brothers
Karamazov, yeah.
Karamazov, and I would like to have your thoughts on that. If I was to read the Brothers Karamazov, would that help me learn how to write fiction?
Depends what kind of fiction you want to write, but Brothers Karamazov is a perfectly structured murder mystery, and at the same time, it's a psychological novel. It's a novel of ideas and a theological exploration. And on the second read, when I was not nervous about who done it and all that, I discovered it's also a comic novel. There's a lot of humor there. So I think you can definitely learn how to juggle many things and how to plot. But there are many other novels that are really good. For example, I just reread The Assistant by Malamud, Bernard Malamud, and it's a perfectly structured novel about Jewish immigrants after Second World War in New York City, grocers. The setting is strong. The characters are well developed. There's good psychology, sociology, and yet there is a plot and the events. It's I think it's a good example of how you can write a novel from character-driven novel, but at the same time plot-driven.
Alfred, there's a little bit of an echo. I think if you mute yourself, I think we'll get rid of that echo.
Yeah, I think yeah. When you want to talk on unmute and otherwise mute, I think that helps. Okay, it's I think just reading a lot helps with learning how to write. You read something that you admire and find something that you would like to write. We enjoy reading different things and probably want to write different things. So it's hard to say that there's one novel that will teach everybody. Oh, okay. Yeah, Maria, I mentioned The Assistant by Bernard Malamud. All right, so now we are silent. But we can talk. So, Maria, are you in Lisbon?
Yes, we're in Lisbon. It's I don't know what time it is. It's 10 past midnight here. So yeah, I think we're probably it's the latest for us compared to other people. I don't know.
Yeah. Cool.
Congratulations on being 15 days on the dry marathon.
Yeah, that obviously was not the image that I was projecting in Kenya.
Well,
Can I ask another question? Okay. Does learning another language, does that help your writing? And does it increase your intelligence?
Well, I'm sure it's good for your mind, but I'm not sure it helps your writing at all. Look at the Greeks. They didn't bother with any languages other than Greek, and I think Plato was a pretty decent writer. And I just mentioned Herodotus. What a fantastic storyteller he was, and I'm not sure. Maybe he did learn languages. He traveled so much, but the Greeks were happy with the Greek, and yeah, there are many examples. I'm not sure that Shakespeare bothered with any other languages other than English. So it's I don't think it's a necessity to speak other languages. Maybe in the New World it might be, but historically we can see that many writers did well just in one language. It's but it's interesting to look at Tolstoy, for example. Russian was maybe his third language because he was raised with an English-speaking nanny, and then he was taught French, and after that Russian. Perhaps that helps his Russian be always concise and clear. In that sense, it may be good to learn several languages.
I just got to chime in here because I did read a study that said that people who have more than one language have a larger real estate in their neural connections in their brain. So I would imagine that if you have more than one language, you just have a lot more real estate in the language area. That's a guess on
Well, my optimistic explanation for this was that when you have a couple of languages that you think through and with, you have stereo vision, stereo sound, and that may give you more spatial orientation, and maybe you can write better that way.
I was wondering, so even though an extra language, let's say, isn't necessarily a necessity to become more intelligent or something like that. In your case, moving to the States at a certain point and starting to write in your non-native language, what kind of challenges did that pose, and how did those challenges lead to perhaps a different style of writing?
Oh yeah, no, I had to go through a reform to reinvent myself because in Croatian I tended to write in long sentences, and at the time we had this kind of bureaucratic language where we had lots of dependent clauses and sometimes no independent clause. We'd get lost, and that's how people talked, and that's how they wrote. And I thought it was normal. Everybody thought it was normal. It has changed now in Croatia too. I think most languages in the world have undergone reform towards some kind of minimalism and clarity, partly through the influence of English, the English minimalists, and the French have also worked on it quite a bit. Flaubert said more juste, for everything there's one word and one word only to describe it. So he was always looking for the right word, and the concision. Brevity is the soul of wit. That kind of thing. The concision was the driving force there. The ambition to be well. Before that, Stendhal said, "Above all, be clear." And that now is prevalent in communist countries where we were completely screwed up with the system, and we were all paranoid schizophrenics, culturally so. Even if you were normal, you would become fearful of many things and cautious. We developed a style of obfuscation and illusion, hardly ever being direct and clear. And allegory was always a big thing, so I try to write like that, and you can even see it in our neighbors. I already mentioned Thomas Bernhard. Long sentences, a whole novel is one sentence. That's appreciated. Well, lots of writers from that area are like that even now, but less and less so. It's the world phenomenon, maybe because we are mixing the languages, that when you look for the common denominator, what you understand, what everybody will understand, it's almost like some kind of Esperanto, even within the same language. We are looking for simplicity rather than for complication. And yeah, when I got to the States, I became a minimalist. First, I didn't want to be, but even in my English classes, we had to write essays, and my teacher would say, "Why is your sentence so long? Why do you have all these adverbs? What are you trying to achieve with that?" And he would show me how much I could waste in the sentence and not lose what I wanted to say. And then I remember writing a philosophy paper. Well, for a year I was in the PhD program at Yale in philosophy, and I took actually a class in well in Hindu mysticism, and I was repeating myself, and my professor said, "What is this? Is this like the oral tradition? You have to keep coming to the same point and repeat it and repeat it?" And I said, "Why, you're right." I said, "Yeah, have the confidence in your listener, in your reader. Say what you want to say once clearly and move on." And for me, that was a revelation, because usually, like in Croatia and so on, when I was a kid, people didn't want to listen to anyone, and if you want to get your point across, you had to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, and that carried on into the writing style. You would, redundancy. For us, that concept didn't exist. So I got to the States, and I had to look. Well, what have I already said? Let me make sure not to say it again. Quite the opposite way of thinking of what did they say? Well, let me say it again, so these fools get it. So in a way, it's respecting and trusting the reader. You don't have to spell it all out, and then this ideology of show don't tell. That also helped me quite a bit. So not to drum the points I was trying to make. So it's maybe not so much the language as the culture and the way the language was used in the United States when I got there. Because there's a huge difference between the English language, the way Charles Dickens used it, and the English language, the way Raymond Carver used it. And it has to do with culture and with the system of communication. Americans don't have that much time. If you want to say something, they'll cut through the chase. And you can see it even in small things. You go to England, and you order a meal, and it's to take away, which is much long. It's not that much longer, but it's longer than to go. In the States, it's to go faster than in the English way, to take away. And of course, it could be even longer. But that's an example of the amazing American efficiency, which I kind of admired, and maybe to my detriment, I actually was chopping all the adverbs and so on adverbs and modifiers in my writing, and I admire the advice that Mark Twain gave, and he didn't practice it. Hemingway did later. He said, once you write a page, go over it and cross out all the modifiers, all the adjectives and adverbs, then reread it, and if you absolutely must reinsert, some of them do. And I think that's a very nice principle, really. And clearly, when you read Mark Twain, he's so flowery, so many adjectives and adverbs. So that was the advice for the other people, not for him. But it's a good one anyway.
Can you just talk a little bit about the same related concept of people seemingly not willing to read long pieces like books? There's so many young people and so many Americans that just are not reading. I don't know. I have a lot of theories on this, but what are your thoughts on, I don't like long flowery sentences, and I certainly don't like passages that go on and on. I like prose that gets to the point, but I think that there's even a larger issue going on where people are just unwilling to read anything that's longer than maybe a little blog post or something.
Yeah, it's a huge problem now for us who write books and even short stories. That the attention span is not there, and even if it is there, I remember once. My son was going to the pre-college Juilliard program as a cellist, and once I was waiting for him in the cafeteria, and there were two kids talking, and one said to the other, "He's such a loser. He reads books," and I thought he was joking. I looked at him, and apparently he wasn't joking. He was serious about that. The kids now, you can do stuff, you can do everything on the computer, the internet, this and that. And if you sit in the corner and read a book, well, you're a loser, It's terrible what's happening, but it's happening. It's... On the other hand, there is a paradox that novels are more popular than short stories. All this we've been talking about for decades now, that if we don't have time, we're in a rush, we should happily just read a short story, 10 pages, and we're done. But people in general ignore short stories even much more than the novels. And I think it's the psychological thing. It's like why people now like the serious rather than just an hour and a half movie. They want to watch a 50-minute long movie that has a continuation and another continuation. So it's shorter than a real movie, but it keeps going more and it keeps going. So it's really like a saga, like a big novel. In a way, somebody compared it to like a novel is like a marriage. If you really want to find a soulmate, and then it's not enough just to do a little bit. You come back, and you want to come back. So it's like a marriage, though I'm not sure it's quite the right. And the short story is like a one-night stand. I actually don't see why a marriage would be preferable to a one-night stand, but apparently in the comparison between the short story and the novel, it does compute. People do want stability. If they like something, because it may not be so easy to find something that they really like, the voice and the world that is created there. And so you want to dwell in it and be able to return to it. And the novel is like that. It's like a home, a family. And someone said that we read for company. We find interesting people, and we want to hang out with them. They become our friends. And in a short story, there's not enough time to become friends. It's like a fleeting meeting. You meet someone on the subway you have an interesting conversation, and then off you go. You have to leave, and you leave. So it's maybe more psychology than anything else. Why actually we do want longer texts, and in that sense there is some hope for the novel form. And I don't know why the short story is always somehow left in the margins.
I think it's an interesting observation. Jan, you are unmuted and you are ready to go. You're ready to go.
Here I am. Hi, Joseph. Thank you for being with us. I've enjoyed your novel. I laughed a lot. I do have a comment regarding culture. I like to observe culture through the way people eat and what they eat and how long they take to eat and how they relish their food, like the French taking 4 hours to have a meal, while the Americans get impatient if their appetizer is 2 minutes long. Or sitting in the south of Portugal, sitting in the Algarve and watching people joyfully sip on their little black snails and wiping the garlic from their mouths. It's just a joy to watch people eat. And so I like to incorporate food in my work. But I did come in late on your comment about the Georgian wine. And if you read A Gentleman in Moscow, he reiterated a meal from the Metropole Hotel, which I've been to, and I recreated that meal.
Oh wow!
And I went to a Russian market, and I got 2 bottles of Georgian wine. It was delicious, and I recreated the pork and apricot stew that he made, that they served, and served it to my book club.
Oh wow!
We loved it. And
Fantastic idea.
it's a great way to experience a culture, even if you don't speak the language.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. For example, cabbage, which is a totally underappreciated vegetable in the Western Hemisphere, is extremely important in Russia and Holland and so on. And there's so many wonderful meals you can make with humble cabbage.
I saw a cabbage. We were following a truck driving into Novgorod, and a cabbage rolled off the back of a truck. And people ran from the sides of the road to pick up that cabbage. And I love cabbage, by the way.
Yeah, it's funny in French, there's one expression for my deer is ma chou, my cabbage.
Yeah, mon petit chou. That's what the Duke of Edinburgh called the Queen, cabbage.
Yeah.
That's a really good place for us to think about starting to wrap it up. The idea of how cabbage is so versatile. There's so much you can do with it. We all as writers can take a lot of this information and a lot of the ideas that we received tonight and make something interesting. I thank you all for being here, and I thank you, Josip, for agreeing to do this. The critique sessions, I don't know if Zoom will just disappear. I don't know, Sasha, is that true or not? Is it just going to kind of cut me off right now at 8:30 exactly? Are we going to just have to quickly say goodbye and say, oh, what's the story? I'm pretty sure that's it.
Well, I will give people my email address if anybody has more questions and so on.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So go ahead, type quick. I think we might, if it disappears, I will send it out as a separate email. But thank you all very much. Thank you, Josip, and Roxanne, thank you for setting us up on the website with these critique sessions. And I hope you all take advantage. It's a wonderful opportunity. And keep abreast of what we're doing. We are very excited about some future plans, and we'll be announcing those shortly. Thank you.
Well, yeah, and thanks a lot. That was so generous of you to organize, and I know it always takes more work than it meets the eye. And so thanks a lot for your perseverance and patience.
Well, we appreciate you agreeing. You were one of the first instructors when you flew down to Florida when we were just brand new, just getting started. And so not only did you help me with my writing, but you helped us get this little nonprofit off the ground. So we really do appreciate you. And thanks for joining us tonight. We'll also hope to see you again at one of our future events. We plan to do more online events like this for writers who are outside of South Florida. We are expanding, and it's starting to happen. So it's exciting. Thanks so much. There's the link. Roxanne has it there.
It's all thanks to COVID. You know, we didn't know we could do
That's
this.
true.
before COVID.
The only good thing about COVID, only good thing. There's a lot of things that were bad, but hey, thank God for Zoom. It's a great thing.
Oh, I thought you would say thank God for COVID. Yeah.
No, I can't say that. No, but I don't think anybody could say that. It's been a heck of a thing. So
That's true.
I guess they did not cut us off. So I don't know if we want to keep talking until they cut us off, or if we all just say our
I
goodbyes.
can
now.
hang in here.
There it goes.
I'm okay. Yeah, we can chat, and we can just watch how Maria.
See how long it takes before we just get cut off. Sasha,
Maria
you can go
Pierre,
ahead
how
and
they
stop the
fall
recording
asleep.
at this. Yeah, I'm sorry.